Trump's foreign policy, today on The World. I'm Carol Hills. Donald Trump attacks America's current foreign policy.
I challenge anyone to explain the strategic foreign policy vision of Obama-Clinton. It has been a complete and total disaster.
And Trump says he's the one to fix it. Also, the Thai couples who buy dolls and treat them like actual children.
They don't talk about ownership or buying. It's more adoption and birth.
Plus, how Europeans fled to refugee camps in North Africa and the Middle East during World War II.
The conditions in camps in the Middle East during World War II were not unlike conditions that refugees are facing today in camps all over the world.
That's all ahead on The World. I'm Carol Hills, and this is The World. It's beginning to feel a lot like the general election campaign out there. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are increasingly looking like the nominees after their victories in yesterday's primaries. And today in Washington, Trump gave a highly anticipated speech on foreign policy. It doesn't get much more presidential than that.
Our foreign policy is a complete and total disaster. No vision, no purpose, no direction, no strategy.
Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, says he's the only presidential candidate who can fix American foreign policy. To break it down, we've got David Rennie from The Economist magazine on the line. David, what's your top line from today's speech by Trump?
I think if you're a member of the Washington foreign policy establishment, the former ambassadors and think tankers who kind of filled this town, you thought it was a very weak speech. You would say he doesn't understand how the world works. He talks about the world as if everything is just another real estate deal. You would sneer, you would say it was just a kind of cheap, populist, kind of nonsensical speech. But here's the problem. I suspect that politically, in terms of shoring up certainly Republican primary voters, it was a really smart speech. Because remember, that same foreign policy establishment has lost almost all the credibility that it ever had. Because, as Donald Trump kept repeatedly pointing out, they made so many catastrophic errors in terms of committing American blood and treasure over the last 15 years. So as a response to the real angst that so many Americans feel about a world that seems very ungrateful for all that American intervention since 9/11, I think it was very smart politics. It was a terrible foreign policy speech, but I think it was probably pretty smart politics.
Trump used the phrase America first, and he's not the first to use it. It was popular in the 1940s from opponents who didn't want FDR to enter World War II. But then in his speech, Donald Trump brought up World War II as a time when America did the right thing. What do you make of that?
Look, if you're keeping score of the contradictions in the speech, that was a very early one. You're right. There was the America First Committee. Remember, you had Charles Lindbergh, the aviator. You had Robert Taft, all these figures warning against going into World War II. He went straight from saying that America First would be one of the kind of defining policies of his administration into talking about the greatest generation and how fantastic America's victory was in World War II. But here's the thing. Look at the places where Donald Trump does so well in Republican primaries. I think part of the power of this speech is a lot of those kind of Rust Belt towns that we saw voting last night in the northeastern states. These are the kind of communities which supply the men and women who fight America's wars. You're talking to the kind of people who feel personally that they have been betrayed, that their children died in vain, that the country was betrayed by bad leadership over the last 15 years. And the really smart political side of Donald Trump's speech, I think, is to say, if you're wondering why your neighbor's child died in Afghanistan or Iraq and whether it was worth it and what it was all for, instead of saying, it's all very complicated, the world turned out to be, less tractable than we thought. He has this beautiful, simple, reassuring answer, which is America is too good, too generous, too kind, too soft. We need to be tougher, nastier, and more selfish, and then everything will magically come right.
Today, did you expect a different speech? Did you think that Donald Trump would go presidential and get granular, or are you not surprised by what he said?
Well, I mean, it was one of the first couple of speeches we've seen him give with a teleprompter. So, there was the teleprompter. So someone else had written it. He had polished it. You might have imagined maybe a bit more work going into it. There were sort of passages which were basically his stump speech all over again. But I think I'm very wary of sneering at Donald Trump on foreign policy, because even if the details make no sense, even if he contradicts himself, even if I certainly think that he is describing a world that doesn't exist, that it's basically fantasy foreign policy.